it. Due to an incredibly liberal set of slave laws present only in this territory, if you were born of a free man, you too were born free. Therefore, she immediately entered the caste known as the free persons of color. Free persons of color only had 3 restrictions placed upon them. Could not vote, could not hold a public office, could not marry a white. But besides that, they had all the other rights and privileges that any other colonial would have at the time. She could move about freely, she could acquire and retain wealth, she was well educated, she read, she wrote, she spoke 3 languages, and on top of that, she owned a business where she plied her trade in the city of New Orleans as a hairdresser. And it was through hairdressing that she came to practice voodoo. Now I know you're wondering, how does that work? Well, let me show you something. Hairdressing back then, a little bit different than it is today. Hairdressing back then, more along the lines of the medieval barber, where you went to your hairdresser not just to get your bangs cut, but you went for upset stomachs, fevers, feminine problems, minor surgical procedures, dentistry, midwifing. Why? Because you have to remember, back at this time, medicine was very, very scary. And the people who were in the hairdresser-barber milieu were most often also apothecaries, herbalists, root doctors, conjure-men and women, healers, shaman, whatnot. Medicine men and women. People calling themselves doctors were doing just that, calling themselves. There was no license or anything like that. They had their, their fire, water, snake oil that cured everything. They were bloodletting, they were leeching, they were amputating, they were doing... Have you ever heard of this thing called purging? Go to the pharmacy museum on Charter Street. It's real cheap and horrifying. They would make you drink mercury, and then when your body went into convulsions from mercury poisoning, they thought you were purging the disease. Yeah, that was medicine. You go to the hairdresser, you're like, oh, I feel like crap, I've got a fever and my body aches. And she looks around, she pulls out a whole big chunk of white willow tree bark and rips it up and says, here, chew on this throughout the day. Suddenly you feel better. Why? White willow tree bark is chock full of acetylsalicylic acid, which just happens to be aspirin. Yeah, that's where it comes from. How they knew this, I don't know, but they did. And so, now you could just cut hair, but obviously if you could heal, you'd have a far more lucrative practice. And therefore she turned, Marie Laveau turned to the tutelage of Sanite Dede. Sanite Dede is our first recorded practicing voodoo queen. And Dede takes her under her wing and introduces her to the religion, to the herbalism first, and she takes to that like a fish to water, and she masters every concept thrown at her, and she even goes beyond the teaching, creating her own medicines and tinctures and whatnot. And Dede says, this woman has the power. She's been sent by the spirits. So she indoctrinates her into the religion, and she takes to that very quickly too. She rises through the ranks of the religion, she becomes a priestess in her own right, and when Dede grows elderly and no longer wishes to practice, she steps down, hands the mantle to Marie Laveau. Marie Laveau graciously accepts it, rises up, becomes the most powerful priestess in the entire area. She becomes Voodoo Queen. All during this time, she's a devout and practicing Catholic. She goes to Mass every day. Married in a Catholic ceremony, is to this day buried in a Catholic cemetery. This is not unusual. You will find that most of your practitioners of voodoo are also, or were at one time, Catholic. Voodoo and Catholicism have walked hand in hand for hundreds of years now. Why? Because, well, at their core, they get along so very well because, for 2 seemingly weird reasons. 1, they're very similar, and 2, they're very different. They're very similar in the fact that both religions believe in one main creator God, and in voodoo he has a name, Bon Dieu. And if that sounds like Bon Dieu, there's a reason, because he's good. But that's all that's known, is that the main creator God is good. He is so far beyond any possibility of mortal comprehension. We can't even hope to approach even the smallest part of him in the least way. So to this end, he has created a series of helper spirits that act as go-betweens between the creator and the created, rather like the saints. And these are called Loa, L-O-A or L-W-A, Loa. And much like the saints, many of the Loa started as human beings, voodoo practitioners, and have ascended. And the Loa are shockingly similar to the saints. There's one Loa for every little thing, just like there's a patron saint for everything, there's a Loa for everything as well. And now they're very different in the fact that, once again, voodoo is religion of a slave race of peoples. Therefore, it cannot be a conquering religion. This religion is about a people who need to adapt to survive. So therefore, when they encounter a new culture, a different religion, Voodoo borrows and incorporates that into its own workings, elements of it, especially usually the physical, the graphic elements. But to show you how that works in Catholicism, the very first Laveau who is always honored in our ceremonies is Papa Legba, an old man with a cane. He stands at the crossroads and he opens the gateway to the spirit realm. So you honor him, he opens the gateway to the spirit realm, and therefore your petitions can go through. Well, they encounter Catholicism, and they find, hey, Catholics have this guy, and he stands at the pearly gates, and he opens the gateway into the spirit realm. That would be St. Peter, right? So they said, okay, all right, St. Peter, boom, you're now Legba. Here we go. You're on the altar. Because spirit is ineffable, but it's only our idea of what a spirit might look like, or our drawings or our statues, and more or less they figure that's just somebody else's drawing of the same spirit. So St. Peter is Legba. And if you look at a Voodoo altar, initially, it might look like a Catholic altar, because it's got so many